Hello, everyone. Welcome to Africa Fire Mission's weekly virtual training. We're glad to have you with us today. My name is Nancy Moore. I'm the Director of Programs and co-founder of Africa Fire Mission. And we're thrilled to offer you this weekly training. We have a new instructor today, and I'll let him introduce himself in a few minutes. But I just want to encourage you to use the chat feature to ask any questions as we go along, and also to introduce yourself. Because it is a 1-hour training, we won't do introductions as a whole class, but I do encourage you to do that in the chat feature. If you have questions during the training, feel free to raise your hand or even just to unmute and ask those questions. We're happy to get those going. So I'm going to pass things to Jose, and he'll get us started with a few words of encouragement this afternoon.
Thank you, Nancy, and welcome everyone for today's class. I'm so excited. I'll let the chief introduce himself today, but before he takes us through the class, I had some encouragement for us. And today's encouragement is about next week's symposium. And, like right now, there are some people who are on shift. And tomorrow morning, you're going to hand over your shift. And do you remember this morning when you were taking over the shift, what did you do? You went and checked all the tools were ready. The hacksaws, the Halligan tool, all the hoses, and also you climbed up and checked water, isn't it? So my encouragement for you is also for next week as we start off the symposium. Just prepare your mind. Have an open mind in the sense that, do you have everything in check? Are you relaxed to receive from the instructors? Because those instructors have already sacrificed their time to come over. So it's up to us now as the participants just to be able to be expectant and open-minded, as we move on. So I'd encourage us next week to get geared up, to stay strong, to ask questions. If you're going to be an operator learning about pump operations, go into the books, get to learn what is hard for you. Like for us now, I have several questions on extrication, get to have those in check, and don't get scared to ask any question, because you know what, this is your time to get into the next level. Your next level is right here with us, and I'm so excited. So that's a word for encouragement of today. And I'm going to welcome our speaker of today. Welcome, sir. The floor is yours.
Yeah, so good morning for me. Good afternoon for you. At first, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to chat a little bit this morning about Swiftwater Rescue with everyone. I'm humbled about being asked to come out and speak, and I'm really honored for the opportunity. So number one, I appreciate your time. I know your time is valuable. So I appreciate you. My name is Jacob McAfee. I'm a deputy fire chief in California, United States. Obviously, all my fire service career has been in the United States. About 21 years fire service, coming on 22 years here this year. I actually started my fire service career in our military, in the United States Marine Corps, doing aircraft rescue firefighting. So that's how I got my start in my fire service career. Got out and I worked with Department of Defense here in the United States for almost 18 years. And now I'm with a municipality here in Fresno, California. Had the opportunity, a really humbling, cool opportunity to work a lot of different places. I've worked in a few different states here in the United States. I've worked in New York, New Jersey, and on the West Coast out here in California and Arizona. So got to experience both coasts, which are different countries per se to some. And I've just been blessed in that way. I do value education and training, kind of work my way up through the ranks. I've held every fire service position I've been in the prevention world. I've been operations mainly my whole career. I've been a training chief. So I've been able to experience all those positions. I've also been a fire chief at multiple departments. I'm really humbled to be here. Like I said, on the topic we're going to talk about today, swiftwater rescue. I'm a swiftwater rescue technician. Been on a couple real life calls. And I also teach for the state of California, swiftwater rescue technician as well. So I'm just humbled to be here, and hopefully someone picks up a couple nuggets of knowledge during my conversation today. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Let me share my screen for you real quick. And as I share my screen, just keep in mind some of the best practices and standards the course is built off of course, are geared towards United States or National Fire Protection Association standards. When we discuss personal protective equipment or strategies and tactics, so on and so forth, those are going to be geared towards that. However, they are considered industry best practice. So just take what you want from it. And we can have some discussion afterward on how that may apply to your resources and your training level and your geographic location. But I just want to throw that out there that this does not necessarily mean this all has to apply to you. This is just the best practice that we use, or that my organization uses in the United States. So once again, North Central Fire Protection District, little bit about my district. We have about 6 stations. We have 78 personnel, 5,000 calls a year roughly. And we do have a big stretch of river in my district. So this is really pertinent to me as well. So what are we going to talk about today? Let me see if I can move my, let me see if I can actually get my, there we go. There we go. All right. So some of the things we're going to talk about today, or I hope to talk about with you today, or you understand at the end, a little bit about water hydrology, just to understand how water moves. Water can be extremely dangerous, and I think sometimes we take it for granted. So just like we would want to understand building construction and fire behavior in a water environment, water can be our enemy, right? But it also can be an ally for us if we know how to use it, know how to read it. So understanding water hydrology is going to be extremely important. Understanding appropriate PPE for water rescue. It's definitely a specialized personal protective equipment. When I say PPE, and my light went off, there we go. Describe swiftwater safety considerations when you're operating in a water environment. Understand self-rescue techniques, right? If we're going to be operating around the water, we have to be comfortable in the water. Just like we would in a structure, if we have to call a mayday or something like that, the same thing in the water. Understand types of rescues. So what are our strategies for rescue considerations when we're engaged in a water environment, and understand the incident command system structure. Those are some of my objectives today. The class, like I said, is built around the National Fire Protection Association standard, NFPA 1006, which is the standard for technical personnel professional qualifications, right? And just like many qualifications or training certification levels, is broken up into operational capabilities. So this class is really going to be a little bit of a mix of operations and technician level discussions. So like I said, you take whatever you want back with you and how it fits your organization, but that's what the class is based off of. All right, so water orientation. Now, we're specifically talking about swiftwater rescue here. So a lot of the pictures I'm going to show you, a lot of the videos that we're going to play will be specific to rivers and streams. However, all the water hydrology, a lot of the tactics and strategies you're going to use, a lot of the terminologies are still going to apply to large floods or river flooding. This is going to be the same situation with a maybe a little bit different twist as far as the hazards and some of the risk level that you're going to experience. But this correlates directly to that. So you don't have to be at a specific river. This can apply to flooding as well. All right, so river orientation, right? So communications is always an issue at any incident we go to, at least in the United States. I could think of almost every NIOSH report or National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health report that comes out on why something went bad. Communications is always an issue, right? No matter what, something went wrong somewhere. So on the In the operations side of the world for swiftwater rescue, we have to understand the terminologies. We have to know how to communicate with each other, and we have to know what each other is saying in order to make us operate in the safest environment possible. So understanding river orientation is important. So best practice river orientation is always looking downstream, right? So everything you say to someone, whether it's river left, river right, is going to be with the orientation looking downstream, right? So if I say river right, that means that I'm standing downstream and looking to my river right. If I say river left, that means I'm going to the left bank. If you're actually somewhere else, maybe you're a downstream spotter or something like that, and you're looking upstream, those river right and river lefts still apply as you're looking downstream, right? And that's important to know, because if you say, hey, there's an issue river right, or go river right or something like that, and you're a downstream spotter and everybody doesn't understand that terminology, someone can do the exact opposite thing and you can miss a rescue, you can miss a save, you can miss something. So just keep that in mind. Orientation is always looking downstream or the flow of the water. All right, so you got your right bank, river right, left bank, river left, and then looking upstream, it's the same exact as it is looking downstream. So I think that's important to know. All right, so what are some variables that make swiftwater rescue so powerful, so dynamic to us as rescuers or fire service professionals? Obviously, volume of water, right? Usually the more water, the more problems we have, whether it's running or not, right? When you take us out of our environment and you require us to either utilize specialized PPE, other means of access and travel, you going from fire engines to boats possibly, it changes the game and how we're going to approach the incident. So volume of water is obviously important. Specifically for rivers, makeup of the riverbed. This can be extremely important too, and it does highlight the fact that if you can, to know your area. I know for us at least, we always preach knowing your jurisdictions, and we have about 230 square miles is what my specific agency covers. And so that's very, very important for us to know at what points in the river do we cover. And we need to get out there and pre-plan those areas, because obviously the river levels rise, right, and drop frequently. So if we know what the riverbed's made out of, is it made out of very soft, silty sand? Is it really rocky? Does it have a lot of debris? Does it have those type of things? Is there a lot of man-made introduction of equipment or apparatus, or the cars down there? Whatever the case is, because those pose direct hazards to the rescuers when they're in the water. And they also tell us a little bit how the water is going to move, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But the makeup of the riverbed, what lies on the riverbed, can be extremely important as well. All right, time gradient, right? How fast the water's moving. Let me adjust my screen real quick. Sorry, I have the toolbar right in the middle of my presentation. Let me try to move that. All right. And then the makeup of the bank. So just like we want to know if we know the makeup of the riverbed, is it soft? Is it sandy? Is it rocky? Does it have big obstacles? Does it have strainers, which we'll talk about here in a second? Makeup of the banks can be just as important, because what that does is it could possibly prevent us from accessing victims or having issues with access to the river, right? Is there better access areas to the river or to the location of a rescue that we need to scout out and we need to understand, right? It's not going to be very good for us if the only areas of access is a really steep rocky cliff, right? That changes some of the strategies and tactics and how we may approach the rescue, because the access is difficult, right? So we need to understand the makeup of the banks as well. So those are some considerations to take into play when we talk about swiftwater rescue and water variables. All right, so river features. All right, so river features are extremely important, right? If you're going to be in water at all, or if you accidentally have yourself in a situation where you're in water because your strategy, something happened and you ended up, we have to know how to navigate safely in the water, right? And so that being said, we have to know the characteristics of what is dangerous to us and what can aid us in either self-rescue or rescue of victims. And so a couple of these pictures here will really drive home kind of some of the things I'm talking about. And I'll show a video here later on too, because I really want you to put words to application through visual means as well. But some of the river features you're going to hear or you have heard before: upstream V, downstream Vs, cushions, and eddies. Okay, upstream Vs. All right, those can be, it says bad, but those can be hazardous to us because it can indicate that there are objects in the water, and any object in the water is obviously poses a hazard to us for entrapment, for injury, that impedes our flow or our direction of travel. Downstream Vs typically are for us are okay because it actually provides us a better access of travel, provides us a safe route of passage per se. And we'll talk about those here more in a second. Cushions is just where you see all those whitewater bases. That's called a cushion. There's really more air in that than there is water. So they call that a cushion. And then eddy is we consider kind of a safe space to operate in. If you look at both of these pictures, you have one of them, which is a upstream V, one's a downstream V. And you also can see the top picture, there's an eddy there. If you see the rescuer standing at those rocks in the top picture, you see me kind of swimming into the eddy there, okay? The eddy is a place in which after current moves around an object, it tries to automatically fill in the area which there is no water moving, right? And what it does is the water curls around the object, tries to backfill itself, but it doesn't have enough volume and it doesn't have enough current to do that. So what happens is it dies off and the area right behind that object is calm as glass. Many times if you're sitting in a kayak, you can actually just sit there without the kayak even moving. And you have extreme rapids to your left and right, right? And we call it a safe spot because if you're operating in the water, a lot of times if you need a break or if you're navigating in water to a rescue, we'll do what's called eddy out. Right? If we're tired or we have a long operation, or maybe we're trying to self-rescue, trying to get to a safe spot, we'll say, hey, eddy out. Well, that just means catch that safe spot. Find an area where there's water rushing around an object, right? Where you have a downstream V and try to swim yourself into those eddies or those safe spots, right? And I have a couple of videos where you'll see that pretty well to identify that a little more. And then in the picture as well, you see the bottom picture, that's going to be an upstream V. So if the V is actually pointed upstream, if you're kind of floating downstream and you're looking this way, right, and the V, the wide part of the V, the mouth of the V is at you as the rescuer, right? So you're going downstream, the V is going this way, the wide part of the V is facing you. That's called an upstream V. And the reason those are bad is because a lot of that current is funneled towards rocks or problems in the river or the makeup of the water that could trap you, that could catch you, so on and so forth. And those downstream Vs are actually opposite and give you an opportunity to use some of the current to navigate the waterways. All right, so some more hydrology. So holes, stoppers, or keepers. All right. These are things that are created obviously by water flow. And that's what I was talking about. When you know the makeup of the riverbed or just your area, if you have a flood, you know what's kind of in your area: trees, rocks, houses, vehicles, whatever type of debris. All of those things change the trajectory of our water flow and can create these things, holes, stoppers, or keepers. Really what happens is as water moves around or over an object, just like you see in the pictures, water immediately wants to fill the place of least resistance. So what it does is it comes over the object, it with a lot of force, hits the water down below the object, hits the water and automatically wants to recycle itself back into the void space. So as the water comes over an object, hits the water below, it creates a void, creates pressure. That pressure immediately wants to refill itself and creates a little stopper. What it does is creates a reverse current. All right, so if the river is running downstream, it goes over the object, goes into the water, creates a reverse current back towards the object. And that's why they call it a hole or a stopper or a keeper, is because if you get into that environment, it's going to keep recycling you right there by the object, right? So we have to be aware of that when we're navigating around the water. And I have a really good video of that where you can actually see something we put in the river just get stuck there. And it just keeps being recycled and recycled as the water flows over the object and down into the river below. So we got to be aware of that, because that can happen to us pretty easily. The other thing that it helps us do as well is those are also areas where we may find potential victims. Right. So when we're looking around the river, we may not find victims in in the running water in the middle of the river, because the water is going to keep taking them. Right. They're eventually going to come to a spot where there's a hole stopper or keeper to where they're going to be stuck there, right? Because they can't get out, or maybe in a bottom recovery fashion, that's just where they're stuck. So understanding these are places that keep objects and people, and these are dangerous places, also help us strategically look for potential victims or people that are missing as well. All right. Strainers is one thing I want to hit on too. Strainers, as a basic definition term, is just anything in the water that water can still flow through. And what it does is, if you have an object, something that's not supposed to be there, a car, maybe there's a tree with a lot of branches, maybe there's something in the water that still allows the water to flow through, but it's a stationary object. What it does is it maintains the river's speed, right? It maintains the flow of the water, the river's speed, but has a stationary object in it as well. So what happens as a rescuer, if you go into a strainer, many times you get caught and the power of the water pushes you against the strainer. There's no relief for you, because the water is still flowing through, let's say, the branches of that strainer or the grate or around that object with such force that you get stuck next to the strainer or on the strainer. And those are very dangerous to rescuers. As a matter of fact, what at least we teach to navigate around strainers is, if you're in the water and you just can't navigate the right way, and we'll talk about how you navigate yourself in the water here in a second, but you just can't navigate the right way. You're trying everything you can to use the flow of the water to go river left or river right, and miss objects here, miss objects there. And you just can't avoid a tree in the water, or you just can't avoid an object in the water that the water's flowing over or through. What we teach is, generally, as you navigate in water, you always want your feet up and facing downstream, right? So you're almost like in a seated position, and you're using your legs as rudders, right? So you turn your legs left or right based on which area of the river you want to go, and let the current push you. All right. And the feet up, what that does is you want your feet up because you don't want any entrapment issues. Right? If your feet are down, it's very easy to get stuck in a rock or in some type of debris on the river's bed. And we don't do that. So we want our feet up. We want to use our feet facing downstream to the river right or the river left to navigate us. Obviously, if we have our feet river right, that's going to push us river left, right? Because all the current's hitting our legs river right. If we go feet river left, we're going to move to the right side of the river. So when we are approaching a strainer, we don't do it that way because we have no real control of the strainer. What we teach is you flip on your belly and you swim like normal. You try to gain as much momentum as possible. And before you hit the strainer, if there's an area above the strainer, you extend your arms and you push over the strainer as hard as possible. Right. So what we're trying to do is get above the current and where the water's flowing over the strainer so we don't get stuck around the strainer. Now, obviously, speaking about it's, a lot different than doing it. But we want to try to avoid strainers or objects in the water at all costs that are allowed to still flow freely. Here's just an example of some strainers that I put around here. All right. So you see there's a tree that's down in the river. The water still flows under and over that tree. Right. So you still have the current of the water. But if you were to get stuck against that tree, you'd have the full force of the water and you against that tree and you're going to be stuck there. And I've done that many times. Fortunately, never in a real world scenario, but in some of the trainings we go through, they make you get stuck so you know what it feels like. And if you've ever been in that experience, you're pretty helpless. You really can't do anything because the water just pins you against the strainer. So it's very important if you can to navigate those or understand what your best option to navigate around them. A couple other ones are just canals. Canals in our area, kind of more inner city stuff. But if there's a flood or something, those posts are perfect strainers, right? Because the water flows freely right around those posts. If you get stuck for some reason on that post, there's going to be a lot of pressure on you. There's just a couple examples. And I have a video of a strainer. I apologize for that. Thank you, Jose, for letting me know you can't see the video.
You're welcome.
I think it's because of YouTube. I might have to go out of the presentation. I have some embedded videos. I'll skip the video, but what you were going to see is similar to the picture on the top right, is there was a portion of a tree that was down, and there was a kayaker kayaking in the river, right? And the kayak got stuck vertically, so it kind of went up as it was going to go over the tree. The water pressure just went against that backside of the kayak and pinned it right against the tree, right? And the kayak didn't go anywhere; it just got stuck in the water like this. Right. And it kind of just gave you an idea. It would have gave you an idea of the force that gets put on you, if you were to get caught in a strainer. So we want to try to avoid those if we can. I talked about this a little bit. We call these utilizing the river ferry angles. And what ferry angles is when you move in a river, you want to move at 45-degree angles. That's what we call a ferry angle. You never want to swim straight across, or you never want to swim straight against any current, right? You'll never win. You'll never win swimming against current. And if you do try to swim across the current, you're never going to hit your destination, and you'll probably end up trying to self-rescue here. But what that means is similar to what I talked about when we were operating in the water. If you're a rescuer in the water, if you're trying to use some type of self-rescue, you're always going to be going downstream, feet pointed downstream, and you're going to be using your legs as rudders. So your legs are going to be together. You're going to move your legs left or right as you want to move to river left or right. If you want to swim across or get across to the other side of the river, you're going to swim at a ferry angle. So if I'm on the river right and I want to go river left, right, I want to get to the bank on the right side of the river. What I'm going to do is I'm going to face upstream at a 45-degree angle. I'm going to jump in the water and swim like crazy. And I'm going to maintain that 45-degree angle. And so what you're doing is you're using the river to your advantage. So you're using the current. When you swim at that 45-degree angle, the water is pushing against your body and helping you push to the other side of the river, right? If you're just swimming against the current, you're just fighting the current, right? So you're going to swim at a 45-degree angle, river upstream, swim as fast as you can. And before you know it, utilizing the current, you're going to be across the river there. All right. So we always want to swim at angles. We always want to use the current to our advantage. And we always want to make sure our feet are up. And we're using those as rudders if we are in the water for either ourselves or navigating to a victim. All right. So I have a video here. So some of the things we briefly discussed, and I know only have an hour, so I'm going through some of this information pretty quick. So I apologize for that. Usually this is obviously quite a longer course. But this video is going to show you visually some of the things I talked about as far as what a upstream V is and what it does, what a downstream V is. It's going to demonstrate the safe place of an eddy, and just talk about basic hydrology, about what we talked about, those haystacks, how water replaces itself, how we have that refilling current there, those hole stoppers and keepers. It's going to show some of that for a visual for you. And I think this is embedded, so I'm pretty sure you'll see it. Jose, if you can, if you guys can't see the video, just let me know. See the video, Jose?
Reading a river is no different than reading a book.
Yes, we can
You just
see
need to
and we
understand
can
the
hear.
language. You need to
Perfect.
have
Yeah,
the
we can see the
vocabulary.
video.
We're going to introduce to you all the different types of features in a river. Once you know those features and know them by name, you're then going to be able to put the pieces together to come up with what the rapid is really doing. What we're going to teach you in reading a river is simply being able to identify the proper route through the river and the proper way to get through a rapid as easily as possible with the skills that you have. Reading a river is a super fun part of whitewater kayaking because every rapid is a little bit different and everyone tells a little different story. Some rapids are long, they read like a long chapter. Some of them are super short and they read like a sentence. Those are the easiest ones. So let's first introduce to you each individual feature. The first feature I want to introduce to you is the eddy. There's several parts of an eddy you want to be aware of, the anatomy of an eddy. The first is the top of an eddy. The top of an eddy is the very most upstream side of the eddy. It's usually up against a rock or right against the shore or around a corner. Then you have the bottom of the eddy. The bottom is the most downstream side.
Okay. You know what, guys, I apologize. I did that. I was going to pause it to talk to you about something. So I'll get it back going for you. Sorry about that.
Reading a book. You just need to understand the language. You need to have the vocabulary. We're going to introduce to you all the different types of features in a river. Once you know those features and know them by name, you're then going to be able to put the pieces together to come up with what the rapid is really doing. What we're going to teach you in reading a river is simply being able to identify the proper route through the river and the proper way to get through a rapid as easily as possible with the skills that you have. Reading a river is a super fun part of whitewater kayaking because every rapid is a little bit different and everyone tells a little different story. Some rapids are long, they read like a long chapter. Some of them are super short and they read like a sentence. Those are the easiest ones. So let's first introduce to you each individual feature. The first feature I want to introduce to you is the eddy. There's several parts of an eddy you want to be aware of, the anatomy of an eddy. The first is the top of an eddy. The top of an eddy is the very most upstream side of the eddy. It's usually up against a rock or right against the shore or around a corner. Then you have the bottom of the eddy. The bottom is the most downstream side where the eddy or the slow water starts disappearing and turning back into current. You also have the eddy line. The eddy line separates the current from the eddy. Understanding the eddy line is key, which is a separate feature in itself. Lastly, you need to know about the pocket of the eddy. The pocket is the most stationary or upstream moving current in the eddy. That's the place where if you can get your kayak to, you're going to be able to sit there and hang out.
Okay, can you still see the video, Jose? Where I paused it?
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to point something out because and this is a kayak video. I chose this because it does go over a lot of different water hydrology, whether it's a whitewater kayak video or a rescue video. I just wanted to point out for in water, if you're in water, whether it's for, like I said, navigating the water, training, self-rescue, you're trying to make your way to a victim that maybe was fortunate enough to get a rock or standing on a rock, and now you have to do an in-water rescue. To navigate to that eddy, obviously, it just shows you what the eddy is, right? You got the upstream side of the eddy, the downstream side of the eddy. But when we're going to try to catch an eddy, is what we call it, catch an eddy. You're going to go to the upstream side of the eddy. So when you're navigating in the water, if I'm navigating in the water and downstream, I see an eddy coming up. I see a rock, I see a nice eddy. I'm moving myself through the water. I'm going to navigate myself to the upstream side of the eddy. I'm going to let myself, my feet are still facing forward, just like we normally would do. I'm going to let myself just go right over that current where the upstream side of the eddy is, that far upstream side. I'm going to let the current start taking me downriver. As soon as I come past the object that's creating the eddy, I'm going to flip over on my belly, my head facing upstream, and I'm going to swim as hard as I can into that eddy. All right. So what's going to happen is you're going to be feet up. As soon as I hit here and I hit this current, I'm going to immediately flip from my bottom, right, feet up, flip onto my belly, and just start streaming upstream as hard as I can to get through this eddy line. All right. The goal is to break the eddy line because you're going to be right here. As soon as I flip over, you're going to be on your belly right here. You're going to flip over, start swimming as hard as you can, swimming. As soon as you break the eddy line, it's like there's no current at all. All right. So that's how you'd catch the eddy, right? If you're in the water. I just wanted to point that out real quick. We'll move on.
You're going to be able to sit there and hang out. The next feature I want to introduce is the hole. The hole is probably the most misunderstood feature in all of river running. And the reason is because holes take a little bit of skill to work with. Now what a hole is, it's simply where the water rushes over a rock, creates a trough in the river, and the downstream water fills in on itself, fills the trough in, creating a foam pile. If you see a wave breaking in the ocean, that foam pile, it's essentially a hole. Same thing out here on the river. Now the anatomy of a hole A hole has several parts you need to be aware of. The foam pile, that's the upstream rushing water. What we call the boil line, that separates the water. It's kind of like the bottom of the hole. It separates where the water starts going downstream again and where the water's still rushing upstream. You also have the corners of the hole. The corners of the hole are where the foam pile disappears and are back into the current. Very similar to the corners of eddies. Now the next thing you need to be aware of is the shape of a hole. When we talk about the shape is if you had a bird's eye view facing downstream and looking at the foam pile. If the foam pile is straight across, we just call it a straight hole. If the foam pile looks like a smiley face, where the corners are further downstream than the center of the hole, we call it a smiley hole. If the corners are more upstream, we call it a pocket hole or a frowny hole. The last kind of hole is a diagonal hole, one where the foam pile runs diagonally across the river, meaning one end is further downstream and the other end is further upstream. Each one of these holes you'll deal with slightly differently, and we'll get into that in the techniques section of how to go through holes. Another awesome feature.
All right, real quick on holes. Obviously, when he goes through holes, he's talking about going through in a kayak, so it's a little different. But if you're in water and for some reason you can't avoid, maybe there's a long straight hole, running all the way across the river and you just can't avoid it. Maybe it's a long drop. Maybe you know that hole is going to be pretty powerful on the way down. Traditionally, that foam line there, that's the area of demarcation, right? Once you cross that downriver, you're out of the hole, right? Because that's the line at which the water is recirculating. Once you get past that, you're out of that dynamic environment where it's recirculating. So if you're going to do that and you are in a large body of water, we're going to be feet first because that's how we travel downriver, right? We don't want to go over it feet first and like we're jumping into a pool feet first. We don't want to go over it into the hole with our feet pointed down to where we're going to hit the bottom of the river, right? We're not going to do that because we know that the bottom of the river can have objects that are dangerous to us and that could possibly entrap our foot, right? So we want to do that. So when we do that, if you're going to go over that, obviously the volume of water, and there's a lot of factors, but if you're going to go over it and you have the opportunity to do that, you're going to tuck your feet in. So if you're going over a pretty large drop, maybe a couple feet, even more than a couple feet, you're going to tuck your feet in. You're going to put your knees up to your chest when you go into that hole. And as soon as you go into that hole and you stop moving down, we do that so our legs don't get caught, right? You're going to tuck your knees to your chest. As soon as you hit the hole, immediately at the bottom portion of that hole, you're swimming downstream. You're trying to break that line, right? To get out of that recirculation flow. So I just want to point that out because they're not going to talk about it because they're doing kayaks.
Sure, in whitewater rivers are rocks. Rocks are pretty much what make the whitewater. The rocks are the bottom of the river. The rocks sometimes are large boulders or just little rocks in the river. You're going to find all of these things in almost every whitewater river you run. What you basically need to be able to identify with a rock is whether that rock is friendly or whether the rock is not friendly. Most rocks in a river are quite friendly. You'll find that they have pillows on them. They tend to be smooth enough that you can paddle around them, you can paddle over them, you can bump into them. There are a few rocks out there that you most definitely need to be aware of. Those types of rocks are, number one, thin rocks, or very sharp rocks where the water hits them and rushes past them very fast. Those rocks are not friendly because they tend to get a kayak stuck or pinned on them. They can be sharp, but also they don't create any kind of a pillow, so the water rushes by them very quickly. You also have what's called undercut rocks. Undercut rocks are simply rocks that are sitting on top of something, and what happens is some of the water goes under them, creating what's called a sieve. An undercut rock is dangerous because not only can the water go under the rock, but also boats and bodies potentially can go under there, causing a pin, entrapment, or even a death in worst case scenario. Now the cool thing about rocks are most of them are extremely safe, but it's key as a river runner that you can identify dangerous rock from friendly rock, and we'll go over those as well. The next feature you're going to find in a river is the eddy line. The eddy line is what separates the current going downriver.
Just real quick on the undercut rock. If you're the shore team, you're like a shore-based team, maybe you're not in water and not doing rescue, maybe you're searching, you're on the shore. A lot of times it's easy for the shore-based rescue teams, whether you're on river right, left, or at a different division. Your responsibility may be to check the undercut rocks as you walk downstream, right? So you're just not looking in the river and continuing to walk. If we're trying to look for someone, or it's a body recovery, then there's a good chance that that person may have got caught in one of those undercut rocks, right? And a lot of times you use some type of a tool and you're just poking down there, you know, trying to figure out if there is something down there other than, you know, the void down there. But a lot of times we find people, you know, under undercut rocks.
With the slack water, which is called the eddy. Now, an eddy line comes in a lot of different forms. You've got crisp, clear eddy lines, which are a sharp line between the current and the eddy. Those are the easiest to deal with. You also have wide eddy lines, mushy eddy lines, or otherwise known as boily eddy lines. Those eddy lines, if you look at it, you don't actually see a distinct line between the current and the eddy. The current almost fades out and then slowly turns into an eddy. So it's less distinct. Another thing you're going to find with eddy lines is how strong the current differential is. Some eddy lines are super strong. There's really fast current and then a really strong eddy. So the current differential is huge, and the difference between the current and the eddy is extremely visible. Then you've got slow or slack moving water with a very mushy or very slow eddy. The current differential is much smaller. The next feature I want to introduce you to is waves. Now, waves are an awesome part of river running. Waves are what make your boat bounce up and down. Waves are things that you can surf in the river. I mean, waves make kayaking unbelievably fun. Awesome. Now, what you're going to find in a wave, the anatomy of a wave, is the peak, which is the very top of the wave. Then you have the trough, which is the very bottom or the deepest depression. You also have the shoulders of the waves. The shoulder is the most to the right or left of the wave as the wave starts to disappear. As we discuss how to go through waves, you're going to need to know that terminology, because we're going to refer to it quite a bit.
All right. So hopefully that provided just a little bit of a visual on some of the things we were talking about. Like I said, we only have an hour, so hopefully that covered most of it. One point about waves, it's kind of our natural tendency as we're kind of floating in the river there. If it's a really choppy or there's a lot of, you know, turbulent water, to as you're floating, you know, you're floating up and down and you're kind of bobbing up and down, kind of a tendency for us to take a breath at the top of the wave, right? So, you know, generally if you're kind of floating, you're bobbing up and down, you see a bunch of waves, we pop up and we see the wave and we take a breath, right? Well, obviously if we do that, we catch a lot of water, right? You can swallow a lot of water that way. So if you are navigating in there, best practice is to try to practice your breaths. If you know you're going to get hit with a lot of water at the bottom portion, when you're kind of bobbing up and down, if you bob down and you know you're coming back up for a wave, you got to take your breath at the bottom, right? So you're not sucking in a bunch of water. And honestly, it's a hard thing to do, a hard thing to practice. I think probably all of us have swallowed a lot of water that way. But we want to typically take our breaths if we need to take a breath at the bottom of that wave. Just some statistics. Now, this is just United States, of course. All right. Here in the United States, our average age is 0 to 14. Some of our most typical victims are Hispanic males, survivability. Some of the things we want to talk about is age and physical mental condition. You know, what were they wearing? Were they wearing a PFD? Can they assist with their own rescue? And if the conditions are worse or better. Now, obviously, we're going to get a lot of that information from the reporting party, right? So those are some specific questions we need to ask, because that's going to help us with our risk assessment, right? You know, if a 90-year-old's been missing for 6 or 7 hours in the river and it's 20-degree water, you know, there's a less chance that we may commit a bunch of resources in water at night for that person, just because the risk versus gain isn't there. You know, the chances of them swimming safely, depending on the flow of the water and the water, of course, but depending on all those factors, it could help us decide, or maybe have one of our strategies to be operate in more of a body recovery mode versus a rescue mode. And that's a real thing in swift water, right? So we have to ask those pertinent questions before. And in the United States, the most common cause for us is is vehicle crossings. Most common rescues that we see with people in water are people trying to cross vehicles trying to cross or getting caught in some type of flash flood. Those type of important to know your own statistics. Where you're at. What are your most common problems? What are the most common age group? And all these things will help you determine survivability profiles when you're doing your risk assessment. All right, some flood, swift water hazards, obviously natural hazards, debris, strainers, contamination. I go over contamination a lot because especially in floods, actually I only have 2 actual swift water rescues that I've taken part of, and that's a good thing in my mind. One of them was actually on a wildland fire. We had a big wildland fire, it burned off all the vegetation. We had a huge rain and it caused flash flooding from the mountains because there was nothing to hold the water back, went through a town. And our number one concern other than the water was everything in the water. We had dead animals. We had hazardous materials because it was flowing through houses. There's house materials in there. We didn't secure utilities. So there are all these hazards, that we need to think about when we're talking about getting in the water that we need to discuss for responder safety, right? And these are just some of them. And I'm sure every jurisdiction is a little different, but these things for you. And that's going to help determine the type of PPE we're going to wear too. Obviously, swift water rescue is not a structural PPE environment, right? Unfortunately, we still see that all the time. And some of it's just because lack of resources. Some of it's from lack of training. But at the end of the day, using structural gear in a water environment, could cause significant risk and many times is extremely dangerous for the rescuer, right? So we can't be of help to any victim if we're a victim ourselves, right? So we need to really have a good base on risk management and deciding the risk versus reward and understanding what the risks are to us if we are to take action, right? So typical swift water or any water PPE, this is typical stuff. Like I said, best practice. You can discuss what's available to you, but obviously a helmet, not a structure helmet, a rescue helmet or a specific swift water helmet is preferable. A whistle and a knife, a light and a beacon. The whistle is for commands in the water, right? So you can actually communicate with people when you're in the water, and we'll talk about that. The knife is just if you get in any precarious situations. I've had to use a knife to cut my own tether before because I got caught and I got caught underwater and I couldn't come up, so I had to cut my own rope on tether. If I didn't have that knife, I wouldn't be here today, guaranteed. So those are the things there for your own self-rescue. Carabiner webbing, obviously personal flotation device, type 3 preferable, and a specific rescue PFD is also recommended. The biggest difference between a rescue PFD, type 3 rescue PFD is they have hookups. So you can go on what we call live bait or on tether. So you can hook a rope up to the PFD. And what it also does is it has what's called the blowout valve. It's basically a little ball that if you get into a sticky situation and you do what I did, I just talked about for briefly, and I got caught in current, not the right angle with my legs. A victim kind of made me get out of the norm there and caused me to get pushed under by the water, and I was on rope. It has what's called a blowout valve. There's a little ball you pull, and what it does is wherever you're connected to by that rope or by that tether, it releases the harness only and keeps your PFD on. So now you can self-rescue yourself. All right. So you pull the ball, it releases the harness, the rope goes, and you get released downstream. Right. Only rescue PFDs have that. If you get a normal PFD, that's not the case. There's really no hookups for that. You have to hook up to the PFD itself. So those are some things just to consider. Obviously pants, tennis shoes, structure boots or those type of things aren't good for swift water rescue. Wet or a dry suit if you have one. If it's available, there's pros and cons to both, but I know I'm running short on time here, but a dry suit is best for real contaminated water because it's almost like you're almost fully encapsulated as far as from the neck down in a dry suit versus a wet suit that uses the water and the suit to heat your body core temperature. So dry suit can be better for really dirty water, contaminated environments, and fins if you have them or if you train in them. Some do's or don'ts, and I'll give this presentation to Nancy as well, and I'll distribute it to Jose or whoever wants it. I have no problem giving this PowerPoint out so you can review it later, because I know I'm running close on time. But obviously, rescuer safety is the most important thing. We can't rescue people if we're a victim ourselves, right? So wearing a PFD, best practice is anytime you're within 10 feet of the water, right? If you're on a shore, you should have a PFD on. Have a plan A, B, and C, right? When we talk about how important it is to self-rescue, that means that if your plan is to throw a throw bag out to someone in the water, but they catch it and you get pulled in, what's your plan B? Do you know how to navigate the water? Do you know where you're going? Do you know whistle commands? You know, what are you going to do to self-extricate yourself? And then plan C, how are you going to get yourself out? So kind of try to think ahead is the key there. Always have downstream safeties, right? Typically you have 1, 2, or even 3 strategic options to rescue someone, but you have to be prepared if those don't work. And if those don't work, they're gonna punch out downstream somewhere, so you need to have someone downstream. Upstream spotters, use the KISS methodology, right? Keep it simple, stupid. Don't overthink it. Use the strategy with lowest risk, right? The lowest risk to you, use that strategy. Obviously, there's some components to that. Use the right equipment and remember your priorities there. Some don'ts, don't put your feet down in the water. Don't count on the victim to be cooperative. That's very important. They're going to be combative every single time. And so expect that. Never tie a rope around a rescuer. Meaning, like, if you're going to go in the water and someone just ties a rope around your waist and ties a knot, that's bad, right? Because you could get caught in the water pretty easily and have no way to get the rope off of you. Use a rope, never use a rope at 90-degree angle. We talked about ferry angles a little bit. When you move in the water, everything in the river is at a 45-degree angle. And I'll show you some things I'm talking about here. Never wear fixed brim helmets. Never modify or change your PPE to use it out of the manufacturer's recommendations. All right, so self-rescue. We talked about this a little bit, but if you're in the water, these are some things you want to be able to do to be safe in the water. Feet downstream, knees slightly bent, toes above the water. And we talked about it already, so I'm not going to do that a lot. Breathe at the bottom of the swell, not the top. You do those things, you'll be able to navigate the water pretty well. Here's some traditional or best practice hand signals. I'm only going to go in the water. If you're in the water, and once again, communication, right? Everybody should know, everybody should be on the same page here. What river right is, what the river left is, what the orientation is, you know, what our hand signals are, what our whistles mean. So if you're in the water and you raise your hand, it means you want help. If you put your hand on your head, it means you're okay. If you want to eddy out, right, you make a swirling motion and point to the eddy where you want to go. But whether you use this or something else, the most important point is everybody has to be on the same page. It has to be a standardized communication method. This is just what I use in my organization and what I teach. So whatever you use is okay. It just has to be known to everybody on the incident, right? These are, if you're using a whistle, right, these are some best practices for whistle. One long blast is, hey, stop and pay attention. And then you have different blasts for, hey, pay attention upstream, downstream, or if there's an emergency, right? So like I said, you don't have to use these. These are just best practice as long as everybody's on the same page. All right, so some incident command strategies here, all right? There's a lot of strategy we can take. Obviously, we're going to choose the one that with the least risk to us, that we can get the victim out, right? We're just not going to jump in the water without evaluating risk. So some type of rescues: shore-based, boat-assisted, boat-based, in-water contact, and helicopter. Obviously, this is totally dependent on what your resources are, right? Many times we don't have the ability to call a helicopter and our boat's not available, or we don't have a boat. So for us, for me, where I'm at, shore-based rescue or even in-water rescue, which can be the most dangerous, are going to be our first options. And many times it's shore-based rescue. So here's the risk: low to high risk. Talk, right? If you can talk, if you don't have to get in the water and someone just has some anxiety and the water's 2 feet tall and they can walk to the shore, they need to walk to the shore, right? You don't need to put your guys guys or girls in risk if you don't need to. But if you could talk them out of the water in a safe manner, that's fine. Reach, a perfect example is we just had, well, I wouldn't call it a rescue, but we had an older person in one of our really populated recreational areas. The river was running. It wasn't very deep. It wasn't very fast, but they couldn't get out of the water, right? So we suited up. We had a PFD. We put someone on the tether in case they got in. And all we did is we reached a pike pole out to them, right? We didn't have to get in the water. It was a pretty steep bank. We reached a pike pole out to them. They grabbed the pike pole and we kind of assisted them to the shore, right? So that would be kind of a reach rescue. A throw rescue is throw bags, right? If you do any type of water rescue, throw bags is like a critical PPE component, right? Where you're throwing a rope bag to someone so when they're in the water, they can grab it and you can pendulum them to shore, right? Go, which means in water. Tow is boat-based, and obviously helo. This is just an example, and like I said, I'm running short on time, so I apologize. Example of a incident command worksheet, and you'll get this PowerPoint so you can review this. Some incident search overviews, right? This is going to tell you kind of best practice, some of your incident command position assignments, you know, flotation group. Decontamination isn't thought of a lot, but if you're in really nasty water, right? When you get out, if you're a rescuer, you want to make sure you get washed off, right? So decontamination is something we forget about, but it's important because we think we're in the water, but that water can be real nasty. All right, logistics, a medical branch, and then obviously rescue branch with your upstream lookouts, downstream safeties. If you have rescue systems, meaning like rope systems you're going to use, your retrieval unit, these are some best practice incident command positions. Here's some examples, and I don't think I have time to go over all of them, but some examples of just using a reach rescue with an inflatable fire hose. You're on either a bridge or an overpass, and a victim floats below the bridge, and you have an inflatable fire hose that's deployed from the top, and they grab it. It's kind of one of our go-tos that we use in some of our canals there. It's just an example, and when you see this on your own and you have time to go through it, it will show the rescue positions, the incident command positions that are assigned for an incident of this type to get an idea of what positions you would assign and where you may go. I'm going to go towards the bottom here. Just keep in mind that, like I said, swift water crosses a lot of different disciplines, right? So if you're using a lot of rope is used in swift water. So knowledge of rope is extremely important. Knowledge of the water is extremely important, and understanding how to use those water currents, right, to your advantage. So no rope should be at a 90-degree, it always should be at a 45-degree angle. There's just some examples of what we call a tension diagonal. If you're going to do some type of shore-based rescue, many times it turns into a high angle rescue, depending on your situation. So just understanding that is critically important. All right, so I'm finishing up, and I'm getting the stare here that I'm over time. Most importantly here, understand that PPE is super important. We have to be prepared to go into the water. We have to know the water to operate in the water, and we have to do a risk gain assessment. We have to really analyze our risk and what is the risk to the rescuer based on the equipment you have and the PPE you have and the potential for victim survivability. These things are so important in water. So water is so dynamic and so dangerous. We want to make sure that if we get in, that we have all these precautions, we have all the right PPE, we have all the right strategies in place to keep us safe when we're trying to serve our communities and make those rescues. All right, so some of the things we talked about, and obviously this was the intro to swift water rescue. So Nancy, I'm just finishing up here.
Great.
I apologize for going over. I'll send Nancy this article too, but I wrote an article in Fire Engineering Magazine. I'm not sure how popular it is everywhere, but in the United States, but it covers almost everything and more that I covered in here. It's called Before You Get in the Water, Things to Know for Swift Water Rescue. I'll also try to get that out to you as well if you want to take a read, but I appreciate everyone's time today.
Awesome. Wow. Thank you so much. And I just sent you a message as well, Chief. Just want to say thank you all for being here today. I know we've used all the time, which I always appreciate. And there's so much to learn on this topic. So thank you very, very much for that. We are just grateful for all of you also attending today. I know there so many topics, so much to learn, so many different techniques and strategies So thank you for dedicating yourselves to be lifelong learners. And we just greatly appreciate that. So next week, our instructor is actually the chief again. So we're grateful for that. And I will actually be in Kenya. So for those of you from Kenya, I'm looking forward to seeing some of you in person soon, along with Jose. And I know we're both very excited about that. We will have class next week, but then the following week, we will take the week off due to the fire training symposium. So that will be taking place in Kenya. Our volunteers will be pretty maxed out that week. So we're excited about that. Looking forward to any questions that you might have or just discussions that you want to have during tea time today with Jose. And I'm going to pass things on to Jose. You will get an email with the evaluation. And for those of you who are interested in receiving the presentation, it will be up on our website. I included that link in the chat within the next week. So you'll be able to access the materials there. So thank you, everyone. And Jose, I'll pass things off to you.